City Department, Health and Mental Hygiene. There you go. Please, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. On behalf of our Capstone team, I'm Natalie, and I'd like to thank you so much for coming and listening to all of the hard work that we've been putting in all semester. We are so excited to present to you our plan to mitigate climate change in New York City. So our goal in this is to reduce greenhouse gases, because we think that that's a really great way to make a significant impact on climate change, to mitigate climate change here in New York. The strategy that we're taking is to increase energy efficiency in New York City's residential buildings. Three specific types of residential buildings that we're going to be presenting to you tonight are New York City Housing Authority buildings, multifamily buildings, and 1 to 2 family homes. And then the results, metrics of that is about how we're going to measure the baseline energy efficiency and the energy savings. So when we were looking at how we were going to mitigate climate change in New York City, we took a step back and looked at all of the sustainability plans that were already in place in New York. New York is actually doing a lot in terms of sustainability, but we found that there was still some things that could be done. The first plan that we looked at is New York City's PlaNYC, which was released in 2007. It's a pretty comprehensive plan that talks about a lot of different measures for sustainability and about reducing greenhouse gas emissions pretty significantly by the year 2030. One thing that we realized it didn't address a whole lot was buildings. And that's where the Green Integrated Buildings Plan stepped in. The city realized that there was something missing from PlaNYC, and in 2009, they released the Green Integrated Buildings Plan, which focuses specifically on buildings, but specifically on really large buildings, over 50,000 square feet. Turns out that those are kind of the biggest offenders in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but there's still a lot more buildings in New York City that need to be addressed in order to really mitigate climate change effectively. And then, fast forward to about a month into our capstone, Mayor de Blasio releases his plan, One City Built to Last, which is a specific plan addressing building types, a lot more building types than the Green Integrated Buildings Plan did. And it also very importantly lays out this goal of 80 by 50, which means to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% of 2005 levels by the year 2050. All those numbers added up means a huge decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. The number actually comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's metrics. That's the maximum level that we can have in order to keep global warming from catastrophic levels. It's so important that Mayor de Blasio picked this number because it's really ambitious. New York City is the largest city to make this commitment to such an ambitious reduction in greenhouse gases, and we think that there needs to be a lot more done in order to really make sure that this happens in New York City. The support is already there, but what was missing from One City Built to Last was specific metrics about how that's actually going to be done. It's kind of a skeleton. So our question is, what's next? What can we do to make sure that this 80 by 50 goal is met in New York City? So one thing that we noticed when we were looking at all of these plans is the city was increasingly focused on buildings. There's tons of buildings in New York City, so it makes sense, right? When we were looking into the specifics of it, we actually found that the greenhouse gas emissions is overwhelmingly in New York City comes from buildings. All the blue pie charts you can see here make up 71% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the city, and they all come from buildings. And then when we're looking into that a little bit further, the biggest chunk of that pie there is residential buildings. Residential buildings weren't really addressed at all in any of the plans that we were looking at. And it turns out that they make up 34% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the city. That's huge. So we decided to focus there and making residential buildings more efficient in New York City. The three types of buildings that we decided to focus on, we'll get to a little bit later, mentioned in the beginning. When we were looking at the specific initiatives, what actual measures are we going to take in order to mitigate climate change in New York City via increasing energy efficiency in residential buildings? We looked at feasibility. Can this actually make an impact on the 80 by 50 goal? We looked at cost. Is this a financially responsible plan that can actually be implemented within the budgets that are already in place in New York? Timeliness. Will this be able to be implemented and make a significant impact by that 2050 goal? But even more importantly, can we start doing these initiatives soon? So we can get within the Mayor de Blasio's administration and really kind of go with the momentum that's already happening in New York. And finally, something that we're really interested in is equity. Does this plan address New Yorkers that haven't been addressed before? Mayor de Blasio, one of his big initiatives as well is equity in New York and making sure that New Yorkers as a whole are being addressed. And that's what this map shows. So the blue areas are those big buildings over 50,000 square feet that have been addressed in previous sustainability plans like Green Integrated Buildings. And those are really the only buildings that have been addressed. And as you can see, they're pretty centralized. There's not a lot in the outer in places where New Yorkers of different socioeconomic backgrounds are living. So we want to make sure that those New Yorkers are addressed when we're mitigating climate change. The first type of building that we're going to look at that has a lot of impact in that area is the New York City Housing Authority buildings, which Priya's going to explain for you.
Thanks, Natalie. So I'm going to share with you some of the highlights for our strategy for New York's public housing, or NYCHA. We focused on NYCHA for greenhouse gas reduction because of its sheer size. It provides affordable housing for over 400,000 New Yorkers across 2,500 buildings, taking up an area 3 times the size of Central Park. NYCHA's biggest challenge by far is money. It's been subject to drastic federal funding cuts and budgetary mismanagement in recent decades, leaving a lot of its building stock in need of drastic repair. On top of this, its energy costs have skyrocketed. In 2015, it's devoted 18% of its total spending to utilities alone, nearly double from a decade ago. Despite this financial hurdle, there has been a lot of political momentum around greening NYCHA in recent years. In 2007, NYCHA committed to the 30% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2017, laid out by the PlaNYC, and since then has been working with Con Ed to implement energy efficiency measures such as replacing old light bulbs, refrigerators, and boilers with more efficient models. In addition, NYCHA's new CEO and chair, Shola Olatoya, has explicitly included energy efficiency in her plans for NYCHA. So this is all very promising, but if we're really going to achieve this target of 80% greenhouse gas reductions by 2050, there needs to be a little bit more effort on implementing energy efficiency in NYCHA's full building stock right away. There's been a lot of talk about retrofitting and implementing these deeper energy efficiency measures, but very little about budgeting or timelines. So with these challenges and opportunities in mind, our team planned a 3-step process for NYCHA to reduce its costs immediately and to finance the more deeper efficiency measures. So before I dive into retro-commissioning, which is our second initiative, I have some questions for the audience. So who here knows how to calibrate their HVAC sensor? Raise your hand. Calibrate your HVAC sensor. Really, nobody? Okay, who here knows how to equally distribute loads across your building's boilers, fans, and pumps? Really? Come on. Okay, I'm just kidding. I don't even know how to work my thermostat, so we're all on the same boat here. Just imagine trying to do that for over 200,000 apartments across 334 developments. It's really, really hard to operate a building, and it's also really easy to waste energy doing it. So the city is aware of this, which is why in its 2009 Greener Greater Buildings Plan, it implemented Local Law 87, which required that buildings over 50,000 square feet undergo extensive energy audits to figure out the ways to increase energy efficiency. And that really just involves looking at all the ways that the current building stock and appliances are not performing at peak efficiency. So the retro-commissioning part of this is the tune-up process. So people go in and they figure out there's a leaky pipe here, this boiler needs some upgrading there, the boilers don't need to be upgraded, but just tweaking and tuning and making sure that sensors are working properly and that the building is just operating at peak efficiency. These adjustments are relatively low cost, but yield really high energy savings and can be done equitably across the entire public building stock. In contrast, something like a boiler system upgrade is really costly. It really involves a lot of time, and it could probably only happen in 1 or 2 buildings at a time. Thus far, there's been no indication that the city or NYCHA intends to undergo a retro-commission of the entire stock, despite the fact that it can reduce these utility costs 18% of its total budget significantly, and can potentially reduce energy use by up to 16%. So we propose that the city work with NYCHA to create a partnership with Healthy Buildings, a company that provides auditing and retro-commissioning services, to undergo this energy analysis of the entire building stock immediately. This will help us save money to finance the deeper efficiency measures, such as retrofits. And on top of this, to help finance our 3 steps, we've systematized available funding that already exists in programs from the federal, state, and city government, and have identified partnerships such as with the Workforce Investment Board on creating job opportunities for NYCHA's residents to be involved in the retro-commissioning and retrofitting process. So that's just a snapshot of all of our hard work for NYCHA this semester. Now I'm going to pass it over to Lauren, who will give you a little look inside at what we've been doing for private multifamily buildings.
Okay, thank you very much, Priya. So just about 5% of New Yorkers live in public housing, but even more live in private multifamily homes. So in New York State, a multifamily home is described as a building that has at least 5 residential units and is at least 4 stories tall. And as our lovely pie graph shows you, 42% of the residential building stock in New York City is made up of these private multifamily homes. So it is a very significant portion if we want to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions. Okay. So as great as this part of our initiative is, there are some challenges. The biggest challenge with the private multifamily homes is the idea of split incentives. So to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of this portion, you're going to have some retrofits. But the way that the retrofitting works is that usually the building owners will pay for these costly retrofits, but then it decreases the energy use. So the savings from the retrofits end up on the tenants or the renters' bills. So the owners are paying, but then the renters get to save all of the money. And why would an owner want to pay so that their renters could save money? It doesn't really make sense. So even if an owner or a renter wants to potentially retrofit the building, they're not going to do it because they don't want to pay. However, there are really